And good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Tuesday Night Q&E. I'm Clay.
I mean,
I'm joined by the lovely,
yeah,
gracious
Q&A.
Each Right. Isn't that what I said? What'd I say?
You said Q&E.
Oh, same thing.
You said Q&E. Okay.
Same thing.
Just
That was close.
Mm-hmm.
Been out working in the yard all day, so I freely admit I am pooped. Pretty day. Got some stuff done, so thankful for that. But I'm a pooped professor. E-Train is her usual ornery, feisty self, but we are glad to be with you. Hope y'all all have had a good day. Good start to the week. Been an interesting week. Lot going on in the world. We'll talk about some of it tonight. Tonight is the night for y'all to, ask questions.
Sorry.
As you can tell, E-Train's internet is still a little fuzzy as she gets caught in that karate chop pose there.
Is it really?
But, yeah. But for those of you watching, please feel free to throw out any questions, comments you've got. For those of you on replay crew, we appreciate you as well. Also, if you think of something, have some questions, email us or DM me at Moffat on Money on the X. Now, we've gotten a few comments. And Ellen and I have talked about a little bit with the glitch Saturday night. We apologize for that. The stream went down.
Hey, Danny.
After a little while, we just gave up. So we will talk about some of that tonight. Danny, how are you, sir? Good to see you. Appreciate you being with us. Hope everything's going well for you so far this summer. So we'll kind of start off with a little bit of where we left off. Hello, Jane. How are you doing?
Hi, Jane.
Hope you're doing well.
Danny can't complain.
No, I was thinking, needed your young, energetic ass around today. I'd let you help cut some of the shrubs and bushes and whack down some of the miniature tree stubs. Tired my ass out. It's funny, I've started getting to where I can go back to the gym and doing some walking and all, but when you use your bodies in ways that you haven't repeatedly trained, it's just an entirely different strain on it.
Mm-hmm.
And feel like I've been through the grinder, but it's a good kind of grinder. It's good to be able to get some work done. Now tonight we're going, one thing I've been focusing on or drawing attention to over the past little while is some of the chaos in global markets. Obviously, some of the political pandemonium that's been, occurring. And tonight we're going to talk about one of the biggest financial threats. So as I said the other night, grab a pen, pour a scotch, or some drink, and prepare to challenge the mainstream narrative. Tonight,
and Jane says,
if the world doesn't come to an end tomorrow, we're good. I was working in the garden after work as well. I miss not having a garden. I hope to get that fixed really soon, but I'm jealous. I am extremely jealous of anybody that can have their own garden and put around in it, grow some of their own food. Extremely jealous.
With all of the negativity that comes from the MSM, it's hard to think the world is not coming to an end.
Well,
I do.
That's funny. You mentioned that in that not necessarily talking about the world coming to an end, but we're going to throw out some things that may give you some thought as to, how close that is to occurring. Now, I actually took the material that I was going to cover Saturday, and I've tried to simplify it some, clean it up some, because I realize not everybody shares my passion for finance and the details, but it's what I've grown up in. It's, I've been doing it for, I don't know, 45 years, and it's innate to me. It's what fascinates me. Um, and I think everybody cares about money. And I think everybody wants to be able to make good decisions with their money. And that's kind of what we're geared toward, trying to give you better information, give you things to think about to help make you make better decisions. So tonight, we're going to talk about kind of my bailiwick, bonds. Bonds in Japan. And people, kind of like, oh, bonds, how boring. Like kind of roll their eyes and go, oh my God, bonds. Who cares about bonds? But let me preface why I'm going to talk about bonds. And, simply, I will say, sum it up as interest rates, bonds, are the most important of the macro, the big picture economy, macro, because they are the price of money. Interest is the price of money. So all of your goods, all of your services, all of the assets that you own or hold or want to buy are denominated in money. And interest rates are the price of that. That directly translates into the value of those things. A majority of people's savings and investment is in bonds, whether they know it or not. The bond market absolutely dwarfs the stock market in size. It's not even close. The derivatives market, which is largely made up of bonds, dwarfs both of them in size. So this really is the most important segment of the financial markets that you should be paying attention to.
Clay, real
Yes,
fast.
ma'am.
Define in macro terms what the bond market is.
It's the largest capital market. It's where businesses are paid for. It's where the government is paid for.
How? Explain that in simple terms.
Government issues debt to pay its bills.
Every government.
Japan, China, the U.S., which is primarily what we focus on.
Mm-hmm.
And remember the teeter-totter. Every time I talk about bonds, you want to remember the teeter-totter. Anybody out there not familiar with the teeter-totter? Let me know. I refer to it a lot, and I know, on occasion we get some new people or whatever. But, and I've got a, brief
I'm going to
tutorial.
I'm going to say that Danny knows what the teeter-totter is.
I'm going to say Danny better know what the teeter-totter is.
Okay. Fair enough.
But in short, the teeter-totter, the little thing you played on in kindergarten, is a perfect representation of a bond.
Some of us called that a seesaw.
Or seesaw. It's got two things that move. A bond has two things that move: the price, the interest rate. They both have. That wasn't quite how I pictured it, but at least you remembered it. And it's got one thing that doesn't change. That's the coupon. Well, so when I talk about bond prices, if interest rates are going up, then the bond price drops. they're inverse. So if the bond price is rising, interest rates drop. So every time I talk about bonds, think about the seesaw or the teeter-totter, as I refer to it.
You said coupon. You did not mention what that was.
Oh, that's just the interest payment in cash. So if I have
Okay, let's start that
$1,000,
over. Go ahead.
yeah. Let me see here. Hold on a second. Come on now.
Danny, you're cracking me up. I have heard the teeter-totter so many times. I feel you. Oh my goodness, we have a whole presentation on teeter-totter.
Real quick. The teeter-totter, which is how you learn finance in kindergarten.
Can you make that bigger without all the side stuff?
Yeah. Whoops. That better?
There you go.
All right. The form. It's just like the teeter-totter, a bond, a debt, or a mortgage are all structured similarly. They react similarly to the teeter-totter. Okay. Now, bonds and teeter-totters have two things, like I said, that move. It has the price and the interest rate, the market interest rate. Now, the coupon is fixed. So if I have $1,000 bond paying 10% interest, I receive $100 a year for the life of that bond. That $100 never changes. Now, interest rates in the market can and will change. They change all the time. So if interest rates go up, the price of the bond has to drop to make this
Hang on.
$100 look like the higher interest rate.
Hang on. Assume $1,000 bond, 30 years at 10% interest, purchased by investors. It pays $100 in interest per year. So that's the payment that you're getting.
Yes, the coupon payment. It's called the coupon payment. It never changes.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what happens in the market, for the life of that bond, you'll get $100 a year. Okay.
Got it. Mm-hmm.
Now, if interest rates rise to 15%, let's say, well, we know the price falls. And if you do the math, the price will fall to $672. And that price has to drop to make that $100 per year interest that you receive that never changes look like a 15% return. Because if somebody wants a 30-year bond, they can take their money and go out and get a 15% return. So if you don't offer 15% as well, you can't sell your bond. Just a market price movement. And
explain why that's important.
Because this will come into play in what we are about to talk about for the rest of the show. Keep in mind this relationship: as interest rates rise, the value of the bond falls.
And the bond is, in other words, what?
Can you rephrase the question? I mean, it's like a stock price. It's what the value of it is worth if you tried to sell it.
Wait. But a bond itself, is it not currency sold by a country? Or
no, it's not currency. It's denominated in a currency. Like Japan will denominate their bonds in yen. China, the yuan. The US, the dollar.
Mhm.
but it is not
But
currency. They can be
okay.
relatively liquid.
Where does the bond come from? Who creates a bond?
Well, anytime you borrow money, you're creating basically a bond. Anytime the US government, the Treasury, borrows money, they sell you a bond. Corporations, when they borrow money, they sell you a bond.
That's kind of where I was going. If you can pull all that
Cities,
together.
counties, states, anytime they borrow money, they do it via bonds. It's just a loan. It's a loan that trades as a security, marketable
And what's
security.
the difference in a security and a stock?
A stock
Same
is
thing.
a security. Yeah. It's just
Is it
an
a type?
instrument that trades in the public domain.
But it's not the same as like if I buy stock in Nvidia.
Stock is ownership. A bond is
Right.
loanership. Stock,
Thank
I
you.
own a piece of the company. With a bond, I don't own any of the company. I just am lending the company money. And I can force
Exactly.
them into bankruptcy if they don't make the interest payment. With a
Correct.
stock, if they don't
So it
pay a
is
dividend, doesn't matter. I can't do anything.
right. So the difference in a stock and a bond.
Yeah, ownership, loanership, loanership, ownership. All right. So rates rise. Rates fall, just the opposite. Interest rates fall. Well, the price of that bond rises. Okay. Again, to make that $100 coupon look like a 5% return. So this relationship is inviolate. It's stiff, like a board. It will adjust inversely. Maturity, you can think of maturity like the length of the teeter-totter. You have short maturity bonds. They mature in 3 months, 6 months. Well, they're not very long. So any movement in price is very small. Whereas if I have a longer bond and move my fingers accordingly, the movement is much greater. So a 1% change in a short-term bond won't impact it. A 1% change in yield in a long-term bond can change the price by 20%.
Because
Teeter-totter.
I know if it's still $1,000 or $100 coupon, it's $1,000. I'm trying to make this simpler for people who don't
I
understand
think you're just making it a little
it the
more
way that you
confusing.
do. Anyone? Anyone have any
Yeah, if
thoughts?
you've got some questions, if this is not making sense, let me know. So keep in mind, as interest rates change, shorter maturity moves less, much less than a longer maturity. So there's less price change. So maturity, the length of maturity, indicates the volatility of the bond, how much the price changes for a comparable move in interest rate. So that's the teeter totter. They move inversely. The market determines the price and the yield, unless the Fed manipulates the rates. And the Fed can force, it's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. It can force rates up or down as it pleases generally. So that's the teeter totter. Everybody with me? It's a simple concept, but it will help you greatly in terms of understanding what we're about to talk about.
So if you have any questions, throw them out now.
So
Anyone?
we know that a majority of people's savings are in bonds. Let me go back to that. So this concept, this movement in the teeter-totter impacts everybody, particularly those who have retirement savings, pension funds, 401ks, they work for companies that borrow money. They are taxpayers in a country like the US, Japan, China that has significant debt outstanding, or their state has borrowed tons of money. California, New York, Michigan, all of
Clay,
these
why would someone purchase debt?
for the return.
Is that the return's not guaranteed though, correct?
Well, the U.S. That's part of the rating of the bond. You can buy
Okay.
highly rated bonds, which have long considered to be relatively safe. So, but it's just the return. Same reason people buy stocks. Bonds are less risky than stocks. If you need regular cash flow,
Sorry.
you want a bond, not a stock.
Sorry, guys. I'm
So
asking all the questions that y'all don't ask. So
that's okay. Yeah. That's really what tonight is, for you to ask questions. And if I say something that doesn't make sense, or if Ellen says something doesn't make sense, let us know, because this is important. Majority of people's investment is in bonds. And part of their investment is the amount of debt they owe on behalf of the government. So
it's a scary
this
thought.
means that interest rates are a asymmetrical linchpin on which the economy and financial markets turn. Interest rates are far, far more important for you to understand what's happening to the economy than the movement in the price of stock. Small changes in interest rates can have a big effect. Large changes in interest rates can change the trajectory of countries. Okay. Now, let's take what we know about teeter-totter and apply it to major economies of the last 30 years, particularly China, Japan, the US, all who have sold massive amounts of debt. Well, who did they sell it to? What group, what demographic did they sell it to? Starts with a boom and ends with an ERS. Boomers.
Boomers.
Boomers. Okay. Boomers have had the biggest wealth gains in history. But what's happening to boomers now?
They're
They're
dying.
retiring. They're retiring
Oh,
and
that.
well, two things. They're retiring and E-Train.
Dying.
They are croaking.
No.
They are kicking the bucket.
Yep. Sorry.
She finds, my impending death funny. That's okay. It's just
No, I do not. I was trying to say it because you're a boomer. I know. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Life turns weird. It wasn't all that long ago that I was just a young snotty-nosed kid. Now, literally, I'm losing friends every week. It's really kind of weird. But anyway, boomers. Think about this is just economics. That an economics lesson that most people don't understand and don't give any thought to. So welcome to Moffat on Money. Boomers have had the largest wealth gains in history, and they did that because they invested a lot through their pension funds, through whatever, personal savings, et cetera, et cetera. Their government that they were participating in has borrowed tons of money. So they have been, over the past 40 years, 50 years, buyers of debt. Everybody with me? Think about it. Boomers no longer are going to be buying debt. not only are they not going to be buying debt, they're going to be selling debt as they collect pensions, as they die and their life benefits have to be paid. The insurance companies will have to sell bonds. To pay for their hospitalization. The insurance company has to sell bonds. The government is increasing its demand for debt. China, Japan, the US, all are issuing more and more and more debt. But the biggest segment of the population who has been buying it not only is not buying it, but is going to be selling it, which increases the supply in the market. Now, when the supply of bonds increases and demand starts decreasing, remains stagnant or starts decreasing, what happens to the price of that asset? It goes down. Price goes down. And with the bonds, as the price goes down, what happens to the interest rate? Teeter-totter.
Goes up.
It
goes up.
Goes up. So think about it. What happens to all the debt they have bought, they funded in their pension plans and their retirement plans while they were working, all the insurance companies, all the banks? This is their largest asset that all of those own. This is how governments have financed their very existence and operation. So,
and the value is going to crap.
And the value is going to go to crap because as boomers retire, as boomers start dying, that forces liquidation of those bonds to pay for their cost. Think about banks. The FDIC last week just issued a report buried in the fine print that showed banks had $4-something trillion in losses, if I remember. Trillions in losses because they've bought a lot of bonds and interest rates have gone up. So teeter-totter, the value of those bonds have dropped.
Now let's go back to the value of $1 trillion. If any one of you and Jesus started a company at zero, BCAD, just zero, and made $1 million every single day until today, you would still not have $1 trillion.
Yeah, we have a hard time conceptualizing what $1 trillion is. We can throw the term out quickly and easily, but we really have a hard time conceptualizing the massiveness of what $1 trillion is. So, banks have all these losses. Well, as boomers withdraw money and are not depositing more money, banks are going to have to eventually start selling off some of their assets. And if they sell an asset at a loss, that loss reduces their capital. They take a hit to their capital, their reserves. And they can only lend out money as a percentage of their reserves. They have to have 10% of reserves for their loan value. So if their reserves drop, they have to start calling in loans. And many people will have a mortgage, for a year or two, and all of a sudden the bank calls and says, "Hey, E-Train, sorry to bother you, but I need you to pay off your mortgage tomorrow and bring us the money." How cool would that be?
Not.
Well, if banks start taking losses, have to start selling these assets for losses, they'll take a hit to capital. And if they cannot replace that capital, because the more assets they sell trying to raise cash, the bigger losses they take. It's what happened in the subprime crisis when everybody started dumping bonds and mortgages. The price
And
kept falling and falling and
and the
falling. They got
value
less and less for it.
the value of the assets continues to decline. What you had before, you no longer have.
Right. And so their losses just increase until they have to just literally shut the door. So and if it's any additional consolation to you, people go, oh, well, the FDIC, my bank's insured by the FDIC. Right now, banks have trillions in losses. The FDIC has about 140 billion with a B in reserves. So basically, the first couple of banks to fail will be covered. After that, there's no money. Think about that for a while. This is going to make Silicon Valley Bank look like a piker, possibly.
Yeah, they can only insure so much as they can pay.
Yeah.
I mean, and then when there's no money left, there's nothing left.
The bank can have the sticker on the door, FDIC insured, but when the FDIC runs out of money, I mean, the government could start printing trillions more of dollars and give to the FDIC, but that has numerous problems of its own. So take this concept that I've been covering and think about the impact of the largest segment of population in all three countries, Japan, China, the US, is switching from being a buyer of bonds to a seller of bonds. So what do you think is going to happen to the outstanding bonds, to the value of those bonds?
Here's a question, Clay.
Sure.
Typically, doesn't China buy our bonds, our debt? And then I know Japan was buying a lot for a while. I don't know that we were buying their debt.
They and Saudi Arabia basically quit buying U.S. debt about a year and a half ago. They've been selling treasuries to try to prop up their currency, particularly with the tariff war. So, but let's stay on topic. I don't want to get into currencies yet.
Okay.
In terms of this impact, we've seen it starting to occur in Japan, which has the worst demographics of everybody. And when I talk about demographics, remember, this is because the young people haven't been having babies. They haven't been having enough babies to replace the number of people dying. That's what I mean when I say demographics. So the population is aging, and you have fewer and fewer people working, fewer and fewer people investing, fewer and fewer people paying into Social Security and paying taxes and whatever. And more people own Social Security, more and more people receiving Medicare, Medicaid. The math just doesn't work out. So
the math does
Japan
not math.
is a good example. We've seen their bond market start to just crack. And particularly the rates on their long bonds have increased 30 or 40% just in the last few months, which is stunning. A stunning increase, and they're not done yet. Now, and that has all sorts of problems for Japan. And we'll get into Japan specific problems, in a minute. But what I want to focus on is just the larger, picture of the demographics. Fascinating interview this past week. Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, stated that there are massive fractures coming to the bond market. He used the word fractures. What do you mean? Well, the interviewer, went on and asked him, the interviewer understood enough that the bond market wasn't going to be a good place to invest per se. And so he asked Diamond, what should Americans invest in? Can anybody tell me Diamond's response? What did Diamond say Americans should invest in? This guy is the head of the largest or second largest investment bank in the world. And what is he telling people they should invest in? He said two things: bullets and rare earth materials, which to me is an amazing answer. Think about it. What picture is Jamie Dimon painting for the future of the markets, for the future of the economy?
That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, what future is he envisioning? Think about what just happened in Ukraine and Russia. I'm sure everybody has seen that Ukraine managed a drone attack against Russian nuclear assets. Now, by treaty, nuclear bombers have to be parked outside so that the spy satellites can keep an eye on them. And so Russia has theirs parked outside. We have all of ours parked outside. It was a relatively cheap hit, and some of those could have been armed or loaded already with nuclear weapons, and Ukraine is trying to blow them up. There was back in the 50s, there was a nuclear bomb that accidentally fell out of a plane over North Carolina. And when they recovered it, they found that 2 out of the 3 safeties had failed. Only the third safety kept it from detonating. How cool would it be to have a nuclear explosion going off in North Carolina in the 50s?
No, thank
We
you.
almost nuked ourselves. But think about it. There has been silence from Russia. And I know some of their top people have been advocating using nukes on the Ukraine now. Tactical nukes, maybe. But nukes. What the hell was Zelensky thinking when he decided to bomb Russian nuclear assets? Are they really trying to start World War III? China, Taiwan. You see increasing tension there, a lot of increased activity, which may be pointing to China attempting to invade Taiwan. Let me just ask you, are you expecting increased military tensions around the world?
Okay, hang on. We got a couple comments.
Okay.
Jane?
Oh, I've been telling you to invest in lead for a long time. I've been telling people to invest in lead for a decade. What the heck was
Lindsey Graham doing there?
That's a $1 million question. I don't have the answer. But
and Clem will be right back.
Yeah, if he's negotiating foreign policy, that's a Logan Act violation, and he should be tried for it. So, do you sense fear or think that military tensions are increasing around the world? My question: what almost always that I can think of in history, what always accompanies economic strife or collapse? War. So what is the big strife in America now? Well, you've got, and I'm just going to be cliff notey here. Um, you've got what most people would label as the globalist and the international bankers, China, all funding huge operations to try to fight the tariffs. Obviously, they don't want Trump to succeed. And Trump yesterday, posted something that was succinct but impressive. He said, if America can't impose reciprocal tariffs, then it's economic ruin for America. And he's right. We will keep losing jobs. We will keep losing capital that creates jobs because what do we have to offer? If we produce nothing, it's like, if you are on welfare and you borrow money from everybody else to pay your bills, but you don't really produce anything that they want to buy. And so after a while, you run out of money. You have to borrow more to pay your bills, and it's a never-ending saga. That is the economic ruin that Trump's alluding to. And you can look at history. What happened to the Weimar Republic? As they could not attract capital for investment, they couldn't grow jobs, but they had huge, huge debts to pay to the Allies. Who can tell me what that resulted in? What did it result in? It resulted in the election of Hitler. Now, I don't honestly think the German people had any idea of what Hitler would do or become. But Hitler promised them that he would stop the payments. He said, they are raping us. They are destroying us. We can't even afford to eat. We will stop the payments. And he stopped the payments. And he started spending more on his military. And without that huge debt burden, the economy in Germany started to grow a little bit. So people there were all excited for a while. Things started getting a little better. And then we know the rest of the story. But do you think today that that people are substantially any different? If they start getting hungry, do you think they'll vote for the person who promises to feed them? You're damn right they will. People really haven't changed. So that's kind of the whole moral of why I go into some of this detail. Because these things matter. And you need to be aware of them and keeping an eye on them so that you are not caught completely unawares if the day comes. Now, we still have a chance to avoid the calamity. It's a chance. We'll see. But that's why the slides you're looking at, I start off with what I call the scariest phrase in finance, and that is margin call. You borrowed money to buy stocks. You borrowed money to buy bonds. You leverage this at, say, 10 to 1, 20 to 1. So for every dollar you invest, you borrow $10. You borrow $20 to buy the asset. So that increases your return. It also, if things go against you, it increases your losses 10 to 1, 20 to 1. So if you do use 10 to 1 leverage, you buy $11 worth of stock with a $1 investment. So if that stock goes down $1, you've lost 100% of your investment. Stock's only down 10%, but you've lost 100% of your investment. Does everybody follow? Does that make sense? That's where leverage becomes catastrophic in financial markets. So the pain of that adds up real fast. Now, if we focus on Japan, Japan is the world's third largest economy, and I refer to it as a powder keg. Well, its financial structure is cracking. It has been living on borrowed time for decades. Currently, its debt to GDP is at 255% and growing. It is double the United States, which is obscenely high. And, people will say it's triple China's. And yeah, China's debt to GDP ratio is about 80 times. US is about 124, 125. So people go, yeah, China's much lower. Well, the thing is, most of China's debt is held at the city or province level. So it's not reflected in their federal borrowing. It's still government debt. And it's still the Communist Party that issued the debt. So it really is all one. I think if it were all totaled, I saw one estimate at 330 something percent. Massive debt. So don't let that 80% necessarily fool you. But this leverage makes Greece's 2010 debt crisis look like a piker. Okay. So, I'm curious, how many of y'all have heard any of this on the nightly news? This in finance should be a huge story because the risk is huge. But it doesn't receive any coverage. Not anybody talking about it. The Bank of Japan has always been kind of an outlier as far as central banks go. They have done their version of keeping interest rates down. They called it yield curve control, YCC, as it's abbreviated sometimes. It's where the central bank just prints money and buys bonds, buys mortgages. Well, supply and demand. The supply is constant, but the demand increases. So the price goes up. And as the price goes up, the yield goes down. So that's how central banks have kept the interest rates low. They have blown up their balance sheet buying tons of debt, whether it's bonds or government bonds or mortgages. So the Bank of Japan has gobbled up a ton of stocks as well. They own 8% of the Japanese stock market. So not only have they focused on interest rates, but they've focused on trying to get the Japanese stock market up so that, everybody looks at it and goes, oh, the market's up, all is well. All is well. One of my favorite movies. If you haven't watched Animal House lately, watch it. Great movie on finance. Anyway. But in Japan, they have been doing this for decades. And even though they have tried to stimulate the economy through low interest rates, it hasn't really worked. They've had what economists call the lost decades because their economy has just been stagnant. Government can't stimulate the economy. It really does a poor job of it because government is a very inefficient allocator of resources. It allocates money to political cronies, not the highest and best use, not the people who are going to put it to the most efficient use, not the people who are going to create the most jobs. So it's a horrible allocator of capital, and it does so extremely poorly. It results in political payoffs, not actual investment. So the BOJ has done this for decades, and the economy has sucked. Very low growth. Well, finally, things are starting to change. Yields are rising. The yen has fallen. It hit 160. BOJ started dumping treasuries, using those dollars to buy yen. So the yen's back at 144, but it's trying to rise again. And the carry trade. Remember last August where the markets dropped 20% in a few days? Everybody blamed it on the yen carry trade. Well, we're close to having that happen again. And the yen carry trade is just simply where you can, because interest rates in Japan were so low, you can borrow money in yen and pay a very, very low interest rate, practically zero. Then you take this yen and you buy like a US Treasury bond. So you're borrowing at 0.5%, 1%, and you're investing it at 4%. So that gives you a spread of 3%, free money. Not only that, but they use leverage. So they'll leverage it 10 to 1, 20 to 1. Remember I talked about that earlier? So they'll borrow 100 million yen and they'll leverage it and buy $1 billion in treasury. Boom. It's free money. Now, let me get my ducks in a row here.
Quack, quack.
Quack, quack. Easier said than done.
Mm-hmm. I am on and off right now, so I've got not sure what's going on here.
Your internet.
Well, I know that. I'm just saying I'm not sure. I couldn't hear you. What?
All right, there we are. Sorry about that. Too many buttons to hit. Now, there has been a huge... Now, I've talked about Japan's interest rates, particularly on the longer bonds, have risen dramatically. That means that people are dumping those bonds. The interest is so low, they're concerned about inflation. They're not receiving enough interest, so they're selling those bonds. The dumping of those bonds causing the interest rates on them to rise. The Bank of Japan hasn't changed its official interest rates, but the market is forcing those rates higher. So there's a huge dash for the exits from Japan bonds, from Japan's debt. Last week, we saw the biggest weekly outflow in history from Japan's equity funds. More than $11 billion peeled off of them in 1 week. So capital is starting to flee Japan, and it's probably not going to get any better anytime soon. There goes E-Train again. Bless her heart. Now, to be honest, Japan is not alone. Europe has started seeing huge outflows. France just announced new tax hikes. Italy is raising capital gain taxes. The UK got rid of their what they call their non-dom rules, essentially destroying their tax incentives. And across the rest of Europe, it's just plain wealth taxes. Okay. So here, these two graphs show the extent of the outflow, nearly $11 billion, which set a record in Japan. Outflow from Japan's equity funds. The money, or some of the money, the biggest inflow was into emerging markets, which are small markets outside of Japan. And only a small percentage, about 4% of that, 4 billion went into the emerging markets. Not sure where the rest of it went, but saw those two courtesy of BOA and thought that was kind of interesting. Now, slide 4 kind of gives us an idea of how all this will transpire. Yeah, there's even talk in the U.S. of implementing a millionaire's tax. Well, newsflash, millionaires are mobile. They can pick up their money and leave. And they have done so. They did it to France a decade ago. France implemented a millionaire's tax and had to cut it after a year or two because their tax revenues declined. Norway just showed us again how this transpires. They raised wealth taxes, promising to bring in an additional 146 million a year. Instead, individuals worth 54 billion left the country, leading to a loss of nearly 600 million in wealth tax revenue.
That's crazy.
Spain just recorded 1,000 fewer millionaires. It was the first negative millionaire migration for that country since they imposed a wealth tax. The UK, this big red bubble here, lost 9,500 millionaires in 2024 alone. China, as it started cracking down and reverting some to the more hardline communist positions, lost 15,000 millionaires. The biggest gainers have been the U.S., Canada, Australia, UAE, United Arab Emirates. Millionaires are mobile. They can move, and they will to protect their money. Now, back to Japan. Investors are dumping. I think everybody's comfortable with that. Inflation is rising. Sooner or later, this combination is going to lead to those margin calls. With all that leverage, the lenders are going to want people paying it back, margin calls.
Would it be a good idea, Clay? Would it be a good idea for them to stop using margins and leveraging?
Yeah, period. It's easier said than done, because particularly with the drops in the market, they've got a loss, and they're hopeful that it'll rebound. Plus, they've enjoyed this spread. It's hard to give up free money. Once you get used to it, it's hard to give up free money.
Yeah, but it's not. I mean, people can't just continue to.
No,
with margin calls, they're losing more than they're gaining.
Yeah, and when they start closing down those contracts, it'll have a significant effect, particularly as they sell U.S. assets. What are their U.S. assets that they're buying with all this leverage trade, carry trade? They're buying treasuries. So they're going to be selling treasuries in order to pay off their debts in yen. Boom. And that's where the global margin call begins. Okay. I'm not trying to be sensational. That's not my style. It's just what I see is a slow moving train wreck. Imagine what happens when Japan and China start dumping treasuries at the same time the U.S. government is issuing $2.6, $2.8, $3 trillion a year. The U.S. government has issued $1.3 trillion in debt in the last 6 months alone. That's close to $3 trillion a year. Meanwhile, In good old China, bless their little hearts, capital outflows are rising there too. Youth unemployment is off the charts. They youth unemployment there is about 30% and rising. Property defaults are stacking up. Foreign investment is negative. That means foreign investors are pulling money out of China. And the Chinese central bank is cutting interest rates while the rest of the world is tightening. And they're doing this to try to manipulate the yuan to keep it from collapsing. Buying time. But it creates a vicious cycle for China. Capital flees, the yuan weakens or wants to weaken. China sells dollars to prop it up. And just like that, the second largest holder of treasuries is exiting stage left. It's not a fire sale. It's a slow bleed. But the treasury markets have felt it, and they're going to feel it. We've seen bid to cover ratios slip, bid to cover, the number of bids versus the amount of offering. So the more bids for each treasury offering is considered to be a better auction. If it falls below 2.8, 2.6, it's considered a poor auction. Japan tried to auction off some 30 and 40-year debt and had to cancel it because there was no bid. The treasury markets are going to feel it. Foreign buyers are going to scale back. If you look at China, their debt picture is just ugly as hell. The IMF pegs their total debt at 40 trillion, mostly corporate and local government, but that's just the central government debt. Remember when Evergrande in 2021 collapsed and how devastating that was for the yuan and China? Well, that was just a warm-up act. Local governments, the provinces, are drowning in debt. They cannot make payments. They're not making payroll. Their workers are not getting paid. Beijing has tried stimulus packages, 1.4 trillion in 2024 alone, and it hasn't done crap to restore confidence or stabilize the economy. Even Chinese citizens are increasingly criticizing the government, which is saying a lot. There was a factory that caught fire the other day, and some of the workers and citizens in the city were outside cheering the burning. Yeah, that's not the China we grew up with. Their property markets are still tanking. Exports are slowing and will continue slowing. And the thing is, if China's debt bubble pops, and it will, it's not just their problem. They're the world's second largest economy, and their demand drives prices and values in commodities like oil and copper. A Chinese default could tank global markets. And I'm not being sensational. This is just a simple practical reality. This is just math. McKinsey, even in a report early this year, noted China's reduced trade with the U.S. and Europe, trying to shift to geopolitically closer partners like Russia. But Russia's not going to import a whole lot. And that's just a red flag. China tries to blow it off as diversification. But it's less diversification, and less diversification means more risk. Now, the big kicker is that China and Japan are the two largest holders of U.S. treasuries. Both are selling. That's not speculation. That's the data. And as their financial systems, come under pressure, they're dumping U.S. assets to defend their currencies. or to backstop their own debt or to try to raise cash to pay their people. So, quick question for you. If China and Japan both hit the bail button, who's left to buy all the debt? What happens to yields? What happens to the dollar? What happens to equities? This isn't doom porn. This is liquidity physics. The first rule of margin calls is it always starts quietly, right before the all at once. So we very well could be in the starting quietly part. Now, and that's where, the Fed and Bessent come in. We're walking a tightrope. Since 2008, the Fed's been pumping free money into the economy. They're using quantitative easing, as they call it. They will go out into the market and buy bonds and buy mortgages. So they're putting cash into the economy, into the investment bank's hands, buying their securities and allowing them to take this additional cash and reinvest it, which is why the markets have kept going up. So the markets are addicted to free money. But printing money to buy bonds has its limits. And we're seeing some of that pain now. There's an analyst, Dion Raboon, on Frontline. He said, it's like giving the economy steroids. It's great until the side effects hit. So the Fed hiked rates to 5.5% in 2023 to tame inflation, and then cut up to 4.5, 4.75 by May in 25. But those high rates squeezed over-leveraged players, hedge funds, banks, countries like Japan. So if the Fed cuts too slowly, Japan or China can't pay their debts. Again, global margin call. Markets freeze, assets get liquidated, get dumped by the ton, and your portfolio takes one hell of a beating. Some of your bonds that you own probably default. That means they go to zero, and you're not getting your money back. JP Morgan's 2025 outlook warns of a 40% recession probability if tariffs and debts converge. That's not fear-mongering, that's math. So that's kind of the brief overview of some of the risk that we're seeing now in the markets, that the markets are not really paying attention to. The investors are, many of them, oblivious to. There's a chance that Bessent and Trump can manage it. A big part of that is being able to enact the tariffs, which, you've got 1,000 district courts telling them they can't. You've got, all of the Democrats and a handful of the Republicans starting to buck against them. The thing is, over the past 4 months, 5 months, Trump has received commitments for about $11 trillion in new investment in the U.S. When I say new investment, think buku jobs. Now, some people go, well, it all won't happen. And maybe. I don't argue that. I'm not a prophet, but a lot of it will. And you compare this to the $100 billion or $200 billion that occurred under Biden's years. I mean, the amount of investment and money flowing into the U.S. will be massive. if that happens, there's a chance that we can actually grow the economy faster than our debt, and that we stand a chance to reduce our debt and add a lot of good, well-paying jobs. So we'll see. It's not a guarantee, but there's a chance. It's off to a decent start, even with all the opposition. Business investment this first 3 months of the year rose 22%, which is a hell of a jump. So we'll see. And there's still a lot of the pain that hasn't been felt yet. Like Trump has laid off, I don't know, 80,000 government workers, but they're still being paid. So they don't show up yet. What happens in September when they start falling off and start showing up? Unemployment's going to rise. I don't know if they'll be able to find jobs quickly. What kind of a job can a government bureaucrat do? It really depends on how specialized their work was, but a lot of them, are not going to roll over well. So we'll see. But anybody have any questions? Any comments? Does that make sense? So Jane, earlier you were talking about everything today is just doom and gloom. So did that help you feel any better? We really didn't coordinate this. Just kind of one of those days. But I've just been seeing so much about how nobody's paying attention to this. And that's a little concerning. So we'll see. Anybody have any questions? I got an email earlier on the Florida market turning down fast. Sellers are increasingly offering reluctant buyers dramatic price cuts. Zillow Home bought for $550,000, sold for $391,000. So that's a $160,000 loss in 2 years, 3 years, 28% loss in 3 years. Now, the housing market in Florida, the housing market in Texas, California, maybe Michigan, even in New York, some of the big cities is starting to take it on the chin. This is going to impact people's value and savings. We'll see. There's just, there's a lot good starting to happen, but can it happen fast enough? My question really is, can it happen fast enough to cover up the problems that are also simultaneously building? We'll see. Anybody have any questions, comments? All right. Well, I hope that gives you something to think about tonight. I'm going to pause there. One, because I'm tired. Two, because missing E-Train, and but if you have something, something strikes you later, let me know. If you've got something else question, you'd like to see addressed, email me, moffitonmoney@gmail.com, or DM me on X, Moffett on Money. If you will, please hit that like button. That helps us out a lot. We really would appreciate it. I appreciate y'all being with us tonight. Hope it gave you something to think about. And if not, I'll try again Saturday night. Same time, 7 o'clock. Next Sunday night, sorry. We switched from Saturdays to Sunday. So join us Sunday night, and we'll do it again. Appreciate you guys. Hope everybody has a great rest of the week, and I will talk to you soon. Blessings to you. Our time is up. We thank you for yours. Good night.